My name is Lucy. In the past, I have imagined my future life countless times, but I never imagined that I would be trapped in this seemingly magnificent cage. Sunlight streams through the huge French windows and falls on the dressing table in my villa. The golden light reflects off my dressing table full of jewelry, diamonds, emeralds, rubies, each one priceless and sparkling with dazzling light. I sit in the carved chair and slowly pick up a comb to brush my long, golden hair like a waterfall. It is smooth and shiny, as if the sunlight has given it life. I have a pair of blue eyes as deep and charming as the vast ocean. Beneath my high nose bridge are lips that are always painted with exquisite lipstick, with a slightly upturned corner of the mouth, as if to show people the affluence of my life. I am tall and slender, and wearing a gorgeous dress. My perfect curves are on full display, every part of me like a carefully crafted work of art. Every day, I spend a lot of time selecting clothes and accessories in order to show off the perfect me in all kinds of social situations. Those expensive dresses, with their silk smoothness and delicate lace, feel like layers and layers of shackles when I wear them. I look at myself in the mirror, still beautiful, but my eyes lack the liveliness and radiance they once had. This magnificent villa is my home with my husband. It has a spacious living room decorated with famous paintings and exquisite sculptures, a luxurious dining room with top-notch tableware and fine wine. Everything here is impeccable, but I can't feel a trace of warmth. My husband, a successful businessman, is always busy with business and social engagements. Every morning, he leaves home while I am still asleep. At night, when I am sitting alone in the living room, looking at the empty walls and waiting for him to come home, he often returns drunk late at night. Our communication is becoming less and less, and our feelings are gradually becoming indifferent. In this luxurious life, I feel lonely. Those so-called friends only surround me because they admire my status and position and say insincere things. I long for genuine care and love, for someone who can truly enter my heart and listen to my heart's voice. This desire grew quietly in my lonely hours, like a seed, struggling to find light in the darkness. I began to crave passion, to have an extraordinary experience that would break up this stagnant life. I knew that such thoughts were dangerous, but I couldn't control my inner desires. Perhaps, from that moment on, I had already embarked on a path from which there was no return, and this luxurious life was merely the ornate exterior of my desires. Time continued to slowly pass in this luxurious yet lonely atmosphere until the arrival of the charity dinner that changed the trajectory of my life. The lights were bright, the music melodious, and the entire ballroom was filled with an air of extravagance. Dressed in a black evening gown, I elegantly made my way through the crowd. The gown was a masterpiece by a top designer, hugging my curves and accentuating my tall figure. The open back revealed my delicate, smooth skin, which glowed softly in the lights. As I raised my glass to sip champagne and my eyes wandered aimlessly through the crowd, I saw him, Jack. He was standing in the corner of the ballroom, wearing a well-tailored black suit that accentuated his fit physique. His eyes were deep and burning, as if they held endless stories, and my heart fluttered when our gazes met. He walked towards me with a steady and confident pace. Every step felt like it was stepping on my heart, and my breathing became rapid unconsciously. When he stood in front of me, I could smell the faint scent of cologne on him, mixed with a hint of tobacco, which intoxicated me. "Miss Lucy, I have heard a lot about you." His voice was low and full of charm, as if there was some kind of magic, making me want to get closer to him. We started talking, from art to life, and I was surprised to find that he had a unique perspective on many things, which was very different from the flattery of my usual friends. His eyes never left me, and there was admiration in those eyes, as well as an indescribable longing. As the conversation deepened, the distance between us grew smaller. His hand touched mine without meaning to, and for a moment, an electric current ran through my fingertips and throughout my body. My cheeks flushed, and my heart pounded. Before I knew it, we had walked to the corner of the garden. The moonlight shone on us, the fragrance of the surrounding flowers filled the air, and everything seemed so romantic and ambiguous. He leaned closer to me, his breath sprang in my ear, and my body trembled slightly. "Lucy, you're so beautiful," he whispered, and then his lips slowly approached mine. At that moment, my reason told me that I should refuse, that I was a married woman and I could not do such a thing. But the desire within me was like a raging tide that overwhelmed me. I closed my eyes and responded to his kiss. That kiss, passionate and lingering, opened the door to my infidelity and led me further and further down the path of lust. I didn't know what the future would hold, but at that moment, I just wanted to indulge in the forbidden temptation and temporarily forget the loneliness and isolation in that luxurious cage. Since that lingering kiss with Jack in the corner of the garden at the charity dinner, my life has completely veered off course. I started to make frequent excuses to go out, carefully dressing up and sneaking off on dates with Jack. Every time we spent time together, I became more and more intoxicated with this forbidden passion and increasingly neglected my busy husband at home. However, the truth always comes out. I thought I had been careful enough, but I underestimated my husband's sharp senses. I don't know when it started, but I noticed that he looked at me differently, with more scrutiny and suspicion. He used to be in a hurry and never asked me about my business, but now he started to ask me about my whereabouts, who I was with, and what I had been doing, intentionally or not. One evening, I returned home after a date with Jack. As usual, I tiptoed into the room, afraid of giving myself away. But when I turned on the light, I saw my husband sitting on the sofa, his face a terrible shade of gray. "Where were you today?" His voice was cold, without a trace of warmth. I was shocked, but still pretended to be calm and replied, "I went out for tea with some friends." He didn't say anything, just looked at me quietly, his eyes as if they could see right through me. I was a little flustered by his gaze, and I didn't dare to make eye contact with him. I turned around and tried to walk towards the bedroom. Just then, he suddenly said, "Lucy, don't treat me like an idiot." My feet stopped, my body froze in place, and a fine layer of cold sweat broke out on my back. From then on, I could clearly feel him keeping a closer watch on me. He started paying attention to my phone, checking my call history and text messages. There were even a few times when I felt like there was an eye watching me in the dark when I went out. I was filled with panic, realizing that things might have reached a very dangerous point. After some investigation, I finally discovered that he had hired a private detective to follow me. I looked at the few secretly taken photos in my hands, which clearly recorded my intimate actions with Jack, and my heart was filled with mixed emotions. Fear, anger, remorse, all kinds of emotions intertwined. I didn't know what my husband would do after getting this evidence, nor did I know how long this illicit love affair could last. I became cautious, becoming more and more discreet with every date with Jack, constantly changing the meeting place and reducing the frequency of meetings. But even so, I still felt as if I were living in a transparent glass dome, with every move being watched. That luxurious cage, which had already made me feel oppressed, was now plunged into endless anxiety and unease by this unexpected discovery. I had no idea what kind of stormy weather was waiting for me. Under my husband's increasingly strict surveillance, my dates with Jack became like walking on thin ice. Every time we met, we were like mice having illicit sex in the dark, being careful not to be discovered. This life of constant fear gradually replaced my original longing for this passion with fear. Just when I was caught up in endless anxiety and unease, I met Mark by chance. It was at an art exhibition. I was wearing a lilac dress and strolling alone through the exhibition hall. The paintings around me were colorful, but my mind was not at all on art. Suddenly, my gaze was drawn to an abstract painting. The twisted lines and intense colors in the painting seemed to be telling an unspeakable emotion. Just as I stopped to admire it, a voice sounded in my ear. "You seem to be able to understand the soul of this painting." I turned my head and saw Mark. He was wearing a white shirt with the collar slightly open, a black tie casually tied, and his hair was a bit messy, but it gave off an uninhibited artist temperament. We started talking, and I couldn't help being attracted to him because of his unique and profound insights into art. There was a sincerity and passion in his eyes, and it was different from the desire I felt with Jack. It made me feel a long-lost sense of ease. From then on, we often met at various art venues. He would tell me the stories behind the paintings and show me the charm of art. I found that being around him gradually made me forget the fear I felt when dating Jack, and I was temporarily relieved from the pressure of being watched by my husband. One day, he invited me to his studio. It was a place full of artistic atmosphere, with canvases, paints, and brushes scattered all over the floor. He asked me to sit by the window and said he wanted to paint my portrait. I sat quietly and watched him paint intently on the canvas. His eyes were full of tenderness and adoration, and it made my heart flutter again. As time passed, our relationship grew closer and closer. In his studio, we had our first deep and affectionate embrace. His embrace was warm and strong, and I was intoxicated. I knew that I was in a new relationship, torn between Jack and Mark. Lust was like an uncontrollable tide, completely submerging me, and I no longer seemed to want to struggle, just let myself sink in this whirlpool of complex emotions. I enjoyed every moment with Mark, but I also knew that this new relationship was also full of unknowns and dangers, and I didn't know what kind of twist fate would bring me. Since becoming closer to Mark, my life between the two men has become increasingly complicated. On the one hand, I enjoy the ease and comfort of being with Mark, who can always fill the emptiness in my heart with artistic romance. On the other hand, I find it difficult to let go of the passionate past I shared with Jack, and the forbidden excitement still gets me every time. However, paper can't hold back fire forever. My juggling between the two men gradually revealed a flaw. It was a sunny afternoon. I was in a cozy cafe with Mark, enjoying our time together. Mark was enthusiastically sharing his new creative inspiration with me. His hand held mine without thinking, his eyes full of love. Just then, I looked up casually and saw Jack's familiar figure through the glass window. He was standing across the street, his eyes full of anger and disbelief. I was shocked, and my hand unconsciously pulled back from Mark's. Mark sensed my unease and looked in the direction of my gaze, and he saw Jack too. There was a tense air in the air, like the calm before a storm. Jack strode into the cafe, his heavy, forceful footsteps like hammer blows to my heart with each step. "Lucy, is this what you've been doing behind my back?" His voice was low and angry, and the surrounding customers were attracted by this sudden scene and cast curious glances. Mark stood up to try to protect me. He looked at Jack and calmly said, "Sir, I don't know what your relationship with Lucy is, but please be aware of your attitude." Jack sneered, "I'm her lover, and who are you?" The tension between the two men was getting stronger and stronger, and a conflict seemed to be about to break out. I stood in the middle, feeling extremely anxious and scared. I had never imagined such a scene, and I had originally thought that I could easily navigate between the two men, but now I found myself in an uncontrollable situation. I looked at Jack and Mark, and the anger in their eyes terrified me. I didn't know how to explain or how to calm the storm. From then on, my relationship with Jack and Mark became extremely tense. Jack kept calling me to question me about my relationship with Mark, while Mark also began to suspect something, unable to understand why I had another lover. I was torn between the two men, trying to appease their emotions, but everything just got worse and worse. I knew I was on the brink of disaster, and that one careless move could plunge me into an abyss, but I didn't know how to extricate myself from this complicated situation, and I could only teeter on the edge of danger. While the tension between Jack and Mark was rising, my husband, who had always been suspicious of me, finally got conclusive evidence that I had cheated on him. It was an ordinary evening. I had finished my short meeting with Mark and returned home with a heavy heart. The atmosphere at home was extremely oppressive. The lights were dim, and my husband was sitting on the sofa in the living room, holding a stack of photos in his hands. His face was ashen and terrible. As soon as I entered the door, he coldly threw the photos in front of me. The photos, like sharp blades, stabbed my eyes. The photos clearly recorded intimate moments between Jack, Mark, and me. Each photo ruthlessly exposed my betrayal. "Lucy, what else do you have to say?" My husband's voice was full of anger and disappointment. His eyes were like a sharp sword, piercing straight into my heart. I stood there, my legs weak, my mind a blank, not knowing what to say. All the excuses I had prepared seemed so feeble and powerless at this moment. I tried to explain and to make things right, but my husband would not give me the chance. He began to accuse me of infidelity, listing all the things I had done over the past few days. His words were like a series of heavy hammers, pounding on my heart. I had never seen him so angry before, and I was filled with fear and remorse. Meanwhile, things had also gotten worse with Jack and Mark. Jack was furious at me for betraying him, and he kept sending me messages full of threats and resentment. He said that if I didn't give him a reasonable explanation, he would go public with what we had done. Mark, on the other hand, was completely disappointed in me after learning that I had another lover. He no longer treated me as gently as before, but became cold and distant. I felt as if I were in a huge whirlpool, surrounded by all kinds of negative emotions and pressure. I had lost Jack's love, lost Mark's trust, and made my husband completely cold towards me. What I once thought was passion and excitement has now become endless pain and suffering. My husband did not choose to divorce me immediately, but used a more stringent method to control me. He restricted my travel, confiscated my phone, and placed me under house arrest. I was like a bird trapped in a cage, deprived of freedom and everything I once had. I looked out the window at the world outside, my heart filled with despair. I had no idea where my future lay, and I didn't know how to get out of this predicament after the truth had been revealed. I could only struggle alone in this dark abyss. The days of being under house arrest by my husband felt like time had come to a standstill. The once luxurious villa had now become a cold prison, trapping me inside with nowhere to escape. Every day, I can only wander around the limited number of rooms, looking out the window at the free sky and the endless stream of people in the street, my heart full of envy and helplessness. I think of the person I once was, wearing gorgeous dresses and shuttling between various social occasions. At that time, I seemed to be in a good situation, but my heart was already full of holes. And now, having lost my freedom, I have truly realized how illusory everything I once had was. I began to miss the passionate times I spent with Jack. His passion was like a raging fire that temporarily made me forget the oppression of life. But now, his threats and resentment are like a sword hanging over me, constantly stabbing my nerves. I also miss Mark's gentle eyes and unique insights into art. He once made me feel a different kind of romance and warmth, but now his indifference and alienation have left my heart desolate. I tried to resist my husband's control. I begged him, hoping that he would give me a chance to start over again. I promised that I would completely sever my ties with Jack and Mark and return to our family. But he was unmoved. His eyes were filled with endless indifference and disappointment. He even increased the number of people guarding me, leaving me with no chance of escape. Once, when the guards weren't looking, I managed to find an old mobile phone and tried to contact the outside world for help. But when I trembled my fingers and pressed the number, I realized that my husband had set restrictions on the phone, so I couldn't make any calls. At that moment, I broke down, tears welling up in my eyes. I felt so helpless and desperate. At night, I often wake up from nightmares. In my dreams, Jack and Mark's accusations and my husband's angry face keep coming back to me, making me break out in a cold sweat. I curl up in the dark, trying to find a trace of warmth and comfort, but all I can feel is the endless darkness and silence around me. I began to reflect on my actions, regretting that I had been overcome by desire and made so many wrong choices. I longed to go back in time and start over, but I knew that was impossible. I could only struggle in this abyss of despair, trying to find a glimmer of hope, even if that hope was so slim. As the days go by, my body and spirit are gradually being depleted. I become more and more emaciated, with a look of despair and confusion in my eyes. I don't know how long I can hold on, nor do I know what the future holds for me, but I know that I cannot just give up. I must find a way to escape this desperate predicament and reclaim my own life, even if the process will be incredibly difficult. In this endless, dark life of house arrest, I sank day by day, exhausted both mentally and physically. Every morning, when the sun struggled to penetrate the heavy curtains and shine on my pale face, I felt like fate was laughing at me mercilessly. I was like a bird with its feathers plucked, unable to fly, and could only linger on in this luxurious but cold cage. However, fate always seems to like to play jokes on people. Just when I was about to be completely swallowed up by despair and no longer had any hope for the future, an unexpected turn of events appeared. It was an ordinary afternoon when the servant in charge of guarding me brought me a bouquet of flowers. I had originally stopped caring about anything in this lifeless life, but when I glanced at a small note in the bouquet, my heart trembled. The note was written in a scribbled but powerful hand. "I can help you escape your current predicament. Tomorrow night at 10 o'clock, wait by the bathroom window for a signal." There was no signature or any other information, but these few words were like a bolt of lightning, piercing the darkness of my life. My heart was suddenly filled with countless questions and concerns. Who is this person? Why is he helping me? Could this be a trap set by my husband to punish me further? But at the same time, a long-suppressed desire for freedom burned uncontrollably in the depths of my heart. I finally made it to the next night. I sat on the edge of the bathroom bed, my eyes fixed on the window, my heartbeat accelerating uncontrollably. Every second felt like an eternity, and I felt my nerves reaching a breaking point. Just as I was about to give up waiting, a faint green light suddenly flashed outside the window. I trembled to my feet, walked slowly to the window, and carefully pushed it open. A dark figure appeared before me, wearing a black mask that only revealed a pair of sharp eyes. "Who are you? Why are you helping me?" I asked nervously in a low voice. "Don't ask so many questions. If you want to get away from your husband's control, just follow me." His voice was low and firm, leaving no room for doubt. I hesitated. Although I longed for freedom, it was all so sudden, and I was afraid it was part of a bigger conspiracy. But thinking about the painful days of the past, the helplessness of being under house arrest, and the fear for the future, I finally gritted my teeth and nodded. He handed me a black set of clothes and gestured for me to change. I put them on and followed him out the window. At that moment, I could hear the sound of my own heartbeat. I didn't know if it was the beginning of new hope or the entrance to an even deeper trap, but I had no other choice but to follow this mysterious man into the unknown future. After following the mysterious man out of the bathroom window, I followed him closely, my footsteps hurried and panicked. The night was as dark as ink, so thick it couldn't be dissolved, and the silence around us was a little eerie. There was only the slight sound of our footsteps on the stone path. My unease grew like wild grass in my heart, and every step felt like I was stepping on my own heartbeat. The moonlight shone through the dappled branches, casting eerie shadows on the ground. I felt as if those shadows were countless pairs of eyes, staring at me intently in the dark. We walked through several narrow alleys and came to the front of an abandoned warehouse. The mysterious man stopped and turned to look at me. His sharp eyes gleamed in the darkness, and I was a little afraid to look directly at them. "Go in, you'll be safe for now," he said in a low voice that stood out in the silence of the night. I hesitated for a moment, then slowly walked into the warehouse. The warehouse was filled with a pungent smell, mixed with the smell of dust and decay. In the dim light, I saw several figures inside, all of them wearing hats and masks that hid their faces. At that moment, the mysterious man walked in. He stood in front of me and finally spoke out his plan. It turned out that he was a member of a secret organization that opposed my husband's business practices. They had some evidence of my husband's illegal activities and wanted to use me to bring him down. He said that if I cooperated with them and testified in court, I would be able to completely get rid of my husband's control and also receive a generous reward. As I listened to him, I had mixed feelings. On the one hand, this was indeed a good opportunity to get away from my husband's control and make him pay for what he had done, but on the other hand, I also understood that once I did so, it would mean a complete break with my past life, and I might even face my husband's crazy retaliation. I remembered the once luxurious but repressive home, the husband I had hurt, and the past with Jack and Mark. My heart was full of contradictions and struggles, and I didn't know how to choose. Time passed by minute, and the mysterious man kept urging me on. My palms were sweating, and my mind was racing. I knew that this was the most important decision of my life, and my decision would affect my future. Just then, I seemed to hear a voice crying out from the depths of my heart, a voice that yearned for freedom and a real life. I took a deep breath, looked up, and looked at the mysterious man and said firmly, "Yes, I promise." The moment I said those words, I felt a huge stone fall from my heart. Although the future is full of unknowns, I am ready to meet the challenges. But I also know that this is just the beginning, and even greater tests await me. After making the decision, I began a series of intense preparations under the arrangement of the mysterious person. They provided me with a new residence, a remote but relatively safe place surrounded by dense woods, as if to separate me from the turmoil of the outside world. While waiting to testify in court, I lived in a state of high alert every day. I was always worried that my husband would find out where I was, or that someone I had had a run-in with would suddenly show up. At night, I was often awakened by nightmares, in which I always saw my husband's angry face and the resentful stares of Jack and Mark. Finally, the day of the trial arrived. I was accompanied into the courtroom by a mysterious man, dressed in a plain suit. The atmosphere in the courtroom was solemn and tense, and everyone's attention was focused on me. I could feel my husband's hawk-like gaze, fixed on me as if he wanted to pierce me. From the witness stand, I took a deep breath and began to tell everything I knew. I told the court about my husband's illegal business practices and his control and oppression of me. As I spoke, the courtroom was filled with the sound of surprised whispers. I could see my husband's face growing more and more ugly, his hands clenched into fists the knuckles of which were white. However, things did not go as smoothly as I had hoped. My husband's lawyer began to cross-examine me fiercely, trying to find holes in my testimony and questioning my motives. They brought up the fact that I had cheated on them, trying to discredit me and make my testimony unbelievable. Facing these challenges and attacks, I felt extremely aggrieved and angry, but I still held back my tears and firmly defended my testimony. I knew that this was my only chance to fight for my freedom, and I couldn't back down. After a long and fierce trial, in the end, the judge announced that the court would adjourn and the verdict would be announced at a later date. As I walked out of the courtroom, the sunlight was blinding, but I felt a sense of confusion. I didn't know what the final verdict would be, and I didn't know if I could really escape my husband's control and start a new life. In the days that followed, I continued to live in fear and anxiety. I received some anonymous threatening letters, the content of which made me tremble with fear. I began to regret my decision and felt that I had been too impulsive. But soon, I strengthened my resolve. I told myself that since I had already come this far, I could not turn back. No matter what the future held for me, I would face it bravely. Finally, the day of judgment arrived. When the judge declared my husband guilty and I was completely free from his control, I had mixed feelings. I had succeeded, but I had also lost everything I had once had, including the luxurious life and those complicated emotional entanglements. I walked alone on unfamiliar streets, looking into the distance, my heart filled with confusion about the future. The cage of desire had cost me so much, and I could only continue forward into the unknown, searching for my own true happiness.